Well, greetings. It's a tremendous honor for me to be with you this morning.
问大家好，非常荣幸今天能跟你们一起。
I fell in love with China in 1988.
我是在1988年爱上了中国。
I met a international student from China in the city of Chicago, and he told me, "You have to come and visit my country."
我那时候在芝加哥遇到了一位从中国来的学生，他对我说：“你一定要去访问中国。”
And I told him I would love to come. I need you to help me. And the following year, he helped make arrangements for me to spend a month on the campus of Xiamen University in Southeast China.
我说我很想去，但是我会需要你的帮助。于是，在第2年，这位学生就为我安排了一个行程。我去了在福建的厦门大学，在那里待了1个月时间。
And in that summer, I fell in love with China and with the Chinese people, and I returned there almost every year for many years.
那个夏天，我就爱上了中国，也爱上了中国人民。从那以后，我几乎每一年都会回到中国去。
I had the privilege of traveling to many different places all throughout China, as far west as Tibet.
在那以后，我也很荣幸的有机会去访问中国很多地方，最西到了西藏。
And one of the lessons that I learned across China was the importance of leadership training, especially training that was anchored in the Bible.
在我横跨中国的过程当中，我学到这个功课，就是领导力的培训非常重要，特别是基于圣经的领导力培训。
At that time, I was studying leadership with a professor of leadership at Fuller Theological Seminary by the name of Dr. J. Robert Clinton.
那个时候，我正在富勒神学院学习领导力，我的导师是罗伯特·克林顿博士。
Bobby became a very important mentor in my life, and I learned a lot about leadership and Bible-centered leadership from him.
克林顿他是一位对我来说他是非常重要的导师，我从他身上学到了很多领导力以及圣经领导力的知识。
And during that time, I recognized the importance of materials to be available in China, and I was able to work with Dr. Clinton and some partners in Hong Kong to translate one of his books into Chinese and help make it available to Chinese leaders.
那个时候我也意识到在中国这种领导力的教材这种书籍非常重要，所以我就和克林顿博士以及香港的一些同工一起翻译了克林顿博士的一本书，让中国的读者可以阅读。
And so I was thrilled when I was contacted about the possibility of my book, The Bible and Leadership, the Top 10 Leadership Conversations in the Bible, being translated into Chinese.
所以后来当我听到有愿意将我的这个圣经10大领导力翻译为中文的时候，我非常激动。
One of the important lessons that I learned from Dr. Clinton is how rich the Bible is with leadership information.
我从克林顿博士学到了一个功课，就是圣经里包含了丰富的领导力素材。
Dr. Clinton helped me see leadership in the Bible that I hadn't been able to see before I studied with him.
克林顿博士帮我看到了圣经中所包含的领导力教导，在那之前我是没有意识到的。
And one of the things that I came to believe through my studies is that most leaders have been trained not to see the leadership lessons that are in the Bible.
在这个学习过程当中，我就开始相信一点，很多领袖他们接受的领导力培训，却导致他们看不到圣经当中的领导力。
I want to make a distinction here because I'm not saying that most leaders haven't been trained to see leadership in the Bible. I'm saying most leaders have been trained not to see leadership in the Bible.
Excuse me, could you clarify the difference?
Yes, I believe that it's not just that we haven't been trained to see the leadership in the Bible, but the training we have received stops us from seeing leadership in the Bible.
Okay, thank you. 但是我需要区分一点，我的意思不是说领导们没有接受培训，所以看不到圣经中的领导力。我的意思是，领导们接受的培训是那一种样式，导致他们没有看到圣经中的领导力。
Generally, when leaders feel an internal motivation for leadership growth, it is almost always motivated by their desire to develop a leadership skill.
当领导者觉得他们需要拓展自己领导力的时候，这种动机大部分时候都是他们觉得自己需要领导力的技能。
But the primary contribution of the Bible to leadership is not skill building.
但是圣经对于领导力的主要贡献并不在于技能方面。
The primary contribution the Bible makes to leadership is not skills, but rather values.
圣经对于领导力的主要贡献不在于技能，而在于价值观。
And so, because most of the time leaders feel motivated to grow based on their need for skills, they look for those skills in other places besides the Bible.
因为领导者觉得他们所需要的是技能，因此很多时候他们就去寻找技能方面的书籍，而不是去圣经中寻找。
This is why it is possible to know a lot about the Bible and a lot about leadership without being a Bible-centered leader.
因此很多时候我们对圣经知识知道很多，对领导力也知道很多，但是结果我们的领导力却不是基于圣经，原因就在这里。
And one of the reasons I wrote my book was to try to change that.
我写这本书的原因之一就是要改变这种局面。
So let me try to give you an example of what I mean.
让我给大家举一个例子。
I think probably all of you are familiar with this verse from Acts chapter 20. It is more blessed to give than to receive.
我想大家都很熟悉这节经文，《使徒行传》20章35节，施比受更为有福。
Paul attributes this verse to Jesus, even though it's not recorded in any of the Gospels.
保罗说这是主耶稣基督说的，虽然四福音书当中并没有记载这句话。
But I want to remind you of the context for this statement from Paul.
但是我想提醒大家注意，保罗说这句话的时候的背景是怎样的。
In Acts 20, Paul is having a by invitation leadership meeting with a group of elders from the church in Ephesus.
在使徒行传20章，保罗邀请以弗所的长老去跟他见面。
And it is in his teaching to these leaders that he makes this statement.
保罗在教导这一群领袖的时候讲了这句话。
If you look at this statement in the context of Paul's leadership meeting, what he is saying is that Jesus-style leaders don't use their power or their influence for personal gain.
当保罗在这个领导会议上做这个教导的时候，他的这个背景告诉我们，我们作为领袖的不要用自己的权柄或者是自己的影响力去做这个领袖的事情。
Jesus-style leaders recognize leadership is not about getting for myself, it's about giving to others because it is more blessed to give than to receive.
保罗说，我们不是要用这些权能和影响来为自己拿益处，而是要为了他人的益处。
This verse, in its original context, is a very specific leadership instruction from Paul.
所以从这个原始的情境来看，保罗给出的这个教导是非常的明确的。
But rarely do we think about it in that specific context.
但是我们自己是否真的是从那一个情景来理解这节经文呢？
Again, I ask the question, why is that? Why do we read a verse like that and miss the leadership implications?
所以我想再一次问大家这个问题，当我们读到这节经文的时候，为什么没有在它里面看到领导力？
And I would say to you, the reason is because there's a disconnect between the primary motivation for leadership growth and the primary contribution the Bible makes to leadership.
所以我认为主要的原因就是领导力成长的主要动机与圣经对领导力的主要贡献，这二者之间存在脱节。
The primary contribution of the Bible for leadership is values, not skills.
圣经对于领导力的主要贡献在于它的价值观，而不是技能。
So I want to introduce you to a simple leadership model.
所以我想让大家看一个简单的领导力三角区的模型。
We call it the leadership triangle.
我们称之为领导力三角区。
It involves a leader, followers, and a specific situation.
它包括领袖、跟随者以及具体的处境。
And this is the most basic framework for understanding any leadership interaction.
如果我们要理解任何的领导力以及他们之间的互动，这是一个最基本的框架。
And the simple question we ask is, how is this leader trying to gain influence with these followers in this specific situation?
我们要问的一个基本问题是，一个领袖如何在这样的具体处境中去影响那些跟随者。
So when you use this model in relation to Acts chapter 20,
所以如果我们用这个模型来看使徒行传20章，
you recognize Paul is the leader, the elders from Ephesus are the followers, and the situation is a farewell meeting that Paul is having with them.
所以当时的领袖是保罗，跟随者是以弗所的众长老，处境是当时保罗要跟他们告别。
And Paul is trying to have influence over these leaders in this situation by sharing some important truths and principles about leadership with them.
在这个具体环境当中，保罗对这些领袖的影响是通过分享真理和一些原则。
This is a powerful way of understanding leadership in the Bible, and it led me to ask an important question. And the question was, how many leadership conversations are actually in the Bible?
我们用刚才的这个模型来理解圣经中的领导力是非常有能力的，因此这就让我想到一个问题：圣经当中共有多少次领导力对话？
I tried to answer that question by looking for research that other people had done.
当我想要回答这个问题的时候，我就去寻找其他人在这方面所做的研究。
But I couldn't find any research that answered this question.
可是我发现我没有找到任何研究回答了这个问题。
So I decided to try to answer it for myself.
所以我决定自己来回答。
And I spent more than 3 years working through the entire Bible with the goal of counting all of the leadership conversations in the Bible.
所以我花了3年多的时间阅读整本的圣经，我的目标就是要去计算圣经当中有多少次领导力对话。
I was looking for the conversations where I could identify the leader, the followers, and the specific situation.
所以当我寻找这些对话的时候呢，我就去找其中的领袖、跟随者以及情境。
And I identified 1,090 leadership conversations in the Bible.
根据这个标准，我在圣经当中找出了1090个领导力对话。
I'm sure that when you hear that, you're probably wondering about the criteria that I used to decide which ones to count and which ones not to count.
所以我想，当你听到这个数字的时候，你可能会想，我用了怎样的标准来决定哪一些是应该算为领导力对话，哪一些不算呢？
I don't have time to answer that now, but I've laid all of that information out in the first chapter of this book, what I call chapter 0 in the book.
今天这个会议我没有时间回答，不过这个过程已经详细的列在我的书里边的第1章，我称之为第0章。
But I would like to apply this leadership triangle again to another conversation in the Bible, also in the life of the Apostle Paul.
不过呢，我今天想用这个三角形的模型来解释圣经当中另一个领导力对话，也是关于保罗的经历。
It's not one of the top 10, but it's one that I think has some really powerful lessons in it.
这个对话不在10大对话当中，但是我认为是同样非常有力的。
I don't have time to go into this in depth, but I just want to give you an example of the rich teachings that we can glean from these kind of interactions.
我们没有时间来讲这一个对话的所有细节，但是我希望让大家能够看到像这种对话当中它所包含的丰富的教导信息。
The case study comes from Acts chapter 27.
这个案例来自于使徒行传27章。
I'm not going to take time to read any of this now. You probably are familiar with this story. You can go back and read it on your own again later.
我们今天没有时间读，不过大家回去以后可以自己来阅读。
In this story, Paul is not the leader.
在这个故事当中，领袖并不是保罗。
At the beginning of the story, he's a prisoner on a ship with 275 other people.
在这个故事的一开端，保罗只是一个囚徒，他和另外275个人同在一艘船上。
Paul is on his way to Rome because he has appealed to Caesar for his trial.
保罗在前往罗马的途中，因为他要去凯撒面前为自己申诉。
And in the island of Crete, Paul meets with the captain of the ship and the centurion, the Roman centurion, and he warns them that it would be dangerous for them to try to sail.
在克里特岛的时候，保罗就和船长以及当时的百夫长有一个对话。保罗警告他们说，如果他们一定要航海出行是非常危险的。
So it is clear Paul was trying to have influence with the centurion and the captain of the ship, but they did not listen to him.
所以很明显，保罗想要影响船长和这个百夫长，但他们当时都没有听保罗的话。
And as Paul warned them, the storm raged and the ship was in great danger.
所以正像保罗所警告的那样，暴风就来临了，船陷在危险当中。
And you probably remember this is one of the experiences where Paul was in a shipwreck and washed up on the Isle of Malta.
所以大家会记得，这在保罗经历当中，这个船就搁浅了，然后他们到了一个摩他的小岛上。
But what's fascinating about this story is at the beginning of it, Paul is a prisoner with no influence.
但是这则故事有趣的地方在于，一开始保罗是一个囚犯，没有任何影响力。
But by the end of this chapter and the beginning of chapter 28, even though Paul is still a prisoner, he is the most influential person of all 276 that were on the ship.
但是到了27章的结尾以及28章的开端，保罗虽然仍然是个囚徒，但是他在这276人当中却成为了最有影响力的那一个。
And so the logical question is, how do we explain that?
所以一个很自然的问题就是，我们如何解释发生的这些事情？
This is a fascinating case study in spiritual authority.
所以这个故事它令人着迷的地方，它是关于领袖的权柄。
Here's how we define spiritual authority. It's the right to influence given to leaders by followers based on their perception of spirituality in the life of the leader.
我们这样来定义属灵权柄，它是指影响的权利，追随者观察领袖在生活中所展现的灵命，依此将属灵的权柄赋予该领袖。
It is important to understand followers don't give leaders spirituality. That comes from God.
所以大家需要记住一点，跟随者不会把这个权柄，就属灵的权柄，从神而来的属灵权柄给予一个领袖。
Followers give leaders the right to influence them based on their perception of spirituality, which has been given to the leader by God.
跟随者给予领袖的是他们能够影响他人的权利，那这个给予是根据追随者的观察，他们看到领袖在生活中展现出怎样的灵命，然后才将这个影响力赋予该领袖。
Paul had no influence at the beginning of this story. He had significant influence at the end of the story.
在故事的一开始，保罗没有任何的影响力，但是到了故事结尾，他的影响力非常大。
He was a prisoner at the beginning of the story, and he was still a prisoner at the end of this chapter.
在故事的一开始，保罗身为囚徒，在这一章结尾的时候，保罗仍然是一个囚徒。
The change in Paul's influence was not because of a change in his status or his position. It was a change in spiritual authority.
保罗身上所发生的改变，不是他的身份或者是他的地位，所改变的是他的属灵权柄。
The centurion and the ship captain and other leaders there chose to give Paul the right to influence them because of their perception of spirituality in Paul.
船上的船长还有百夫长，他们将这个影响力的权利给了保罗，是因为他们在船上观察到了保罗的所作言行。
So the important question is, how does this happen? How does a person gain spiritual authority?
因此我们要问一个问题，这一切是怎么发生的？一个领袖他怎么样获得影响力？
I think that there are 3 answers to that question.
我想有3个答案。
The first is modeling godly character over time.
第一个是在长期的时间里边塑造敬虔的品格。
And the key is over time. It's not just modeling character one time, it's modeling it consistently over a long time.
这里的关键是长期，领导的敬虔的品格不是表现一次，而是长期的始终如一的表现出来。
Paul wasn't with these people on the ship for many, many months, but the consistency of his character modeled godliness for the other people on the ship.
保罗在这个船上并没有和这些人待上很多月，但是在他身上始终如一的展现出属神的品格。
The second way we gain influence, spiritual authority, is by sharing spiritual experiences.
获得属灵权柄的第二个 答案是分享属灵经历。
In this case, leaders talk with followers authentically about what God is doing in their lives.
我的意思是说，一位领袖他愿意很真诚的和这些跟随者来分享神在他的生命当中所做的事情。
Paul spent time on the ship praying and in intimate communion with God.
在船上的时候，保罗也花时间向神祷告，与神有亲密的时间。
And he shared with the other people on the ship what God was saying to him in his time alone with God.
他也向船上的人分享，当他独自和神在一起的时候，神对他所讲的话。
The third way we gain spiritual authority is by serving with gifted power.
我们获得属灵权柄的第三个途径是用神所赐的能力来服侍。
When we use our spiritual gifts in the power of the Holy Spirit, in the service of other people, we gain spiritual authority.
当我们是靠着圣灵的能力，用属灵的恩赐来服侍他人的时候，我们就获得了属灵权柄。
Spiritual authority isn't the only legitimate form of influence, but it is the most important.
属灵权柄并不是唯一的合法的权柄，但是它是最重要的那一个。
Now, I realize that I haven't been able to go into this in any significant detail.
我意识到我们今天所讲的这一些都没有办法深入很多细节。
But what I hope you can recognize is that in reading this story, there are some powerful leadership principles and leadership values.
但是我希望大家能够意识到一点，当我们阅读圣经的时候，里面有很多大有能力的这个圣经的原则。
And when we use this simple approach in studying the Bible, there are powerful lessons that we can learn.
我们用的是一个简单的方法来读圣经，但是我们从中得到的教导是非常的丰富有能力。
In my research, I discovered 1,090 leadership conversations in the Bible.
在我研究领导力的过程当中，我在圣经里面找到了1090次领导力对话。
And I began to study them to try to identify which ones were most important.
接下来我就开始去鉴别哪些对话是最重要的。
And in my book, I've focused on 10 specific leadership conversations.
在我的书里边，我就是集中阐述了10个领导力对话。
But my real hope is that I will be able to inspire you to take these principles, these ideas, these Bible study skills, and put them to work for yourself.
但是我真正的盼望是希望这个研究这本书能够激励你们，能够用我们所分享的原则、技能和这些观念，然后你自己来学习圣经。